you could actually be here the rest of your life and never be released again. And this is your world, as long as you're breathing.
It's a world inside of a world here. The world on the outside, only thing different really is there's freedom out there.
It is very dangerous each and every day. You can use your life in here in a heartbeat.
State Penitentiary, Auburn, New York. It is the centerpiece of a city, a monument to one of America's first attempts at criminal rehabilitation. Its founders believed their task could be accomplished through penitence, hard work, and silence. 180 years later, all that remains of that regime is hard work and hard time for the most violent offenders in the state of New York.
Rape, robbery, burglary, murder, manslaughter, drugs, you name it, and they're here.
But crime and punishment are not the prison's only legacy.
You know, I like this line of work. My father did it, my grandfather did it, so it's kind of, I guess it's like second nature to me.
The traditions here began in 1816. The town of Auburn, 30 miles west of Syracuse, was an isolated village when the first cell house was built. Before then, lawbreakers in the state were punished by the same methods in use since colonial times. Criminals faced public humiliation and barbarous tortures like lashing and branding or spending long periods of time in the stocks. But America was becoming a civilized democracy. Auburn Prison was intended to offer a more humane alternative to corporal punishment. Based on the Quaker ideal of man's innate goodness, the prison was built on the belief that solitude and hard labor could return criminals to their true moral purity. Throughout the 19th century, new inmates were expected to cooperate as they were processed into the prison, searched, then stripped and bathed. Finally, their physical features were carefully measured and cataloged for identification. They were then led to their cells to begin life under a penal philosophy known around the world as the Auburn System. The first cell houses would become the model adopted by prisons across the United States. Each stone cell was just large enough to hold one man, a cot, and sometimes a chair. There was little natural light, and sanitary facilities were nothing more than a slop bucket.
The slop bucket was used because there was no plumbing in the facility's cells, so an inmate used the bucket for his personal use, and he remained with that until morning when they all marched to the bucket house to dispose of whatever they had in their bucket, and then proceeded to work, and then later to breakfast.
The inmates were issued one loaf of bread each day and ate shoulder to shoulder in the dining hall. Guards stood by to make sure that no words were spoken. In fact, strict silence was maintained at all times. It was the most profound feature of the Auburn system.
The silent system, or the Auburn system, was based upon total control of the inmates from dawn to dusk. The inmate silent system demanded that the inmates not speak to each other. They were to spend their evenings in complete silence in a solitary cell.
After a few weeks in Auburn, the urge to talk became almost irresistible, but silence was enforced with swift punishment. Inmates were flogged for talking in the mess hall and flogged again if they tried to communicate using sign language.
The silence was meant for the inmates to be able to reflect on their wrongdoing so that their conscience would be a principal source of their punishment. And silence and labor were thought to be a regime in which the inmate would be reformed.
The silence not only furthered Auburn's goal of penitence and self-reflection, it also enhanced security. Inmates who could not talk could not plot escapes or riots. At night, the guards, who were known as keepers, tiptoed shoeless up and down the cell blocks to detect whispers. Auburn's early inmates spent their days in silent labor. To make the prison self-supporting, they manufactured clothing, chairs, carpets, wagons, and brooms. Female inmates who were housed in the attic above the South Wing cell block spent long hours in sewing rooms 6 days a week. When prisoners were not at work, each and every movement was regimented and controlled.
The lockstep, which was instituted in Auburn, was a shuffle military-type step where one inmate would walk behind another in tight formation with his hand upon the inmate's shoulder in front of him, and they were all to have their downcast eyes and all looking to one side towards the principal keeper or the keeper who was marching them. And the keeper would have a cane, and he would hit the cane against the ground or a wall to signify direction or order that he wished the inmates to comply with.
Today, the lockstep is a distant memory, but control is a continuing concern. In addition to housing an inmate population of 1,800, Auburn serves as a way station for the entire New York prison system.
It's like slave ship.
New York's a police state.
What we're doing is we're dropping off inmates from Ulster Correctional Facility and transferring them and picking up inmates going back down towards the city. And what they're doing now is uncuffing them and unshackling them. And then when we're finished with that, we'll be IDing the new inmates, putting on a bus, and reshackling and recuffing them. All right, for the next 4 hours, you'll be traveling on my bus. All you got to do on this bus is respect my officers, and I'll respect you. No talking on the bus for the next 3.5, 4 hours. You understand that? Is there any questions? No? I'll ID you, we'll shack you, and we'll get you out of here.
First two? Well, when they bring you on the bus, they have you shackled from the feet and around the waist. When you come in on the bus, you have to get up on the bus, and it's rough because all you have is a bag, a small bag of lunch, which you have to carry onto the bus.
When you come out, I'm going to pat you down. If you got anything in your pocket, or for medication, eyeglass case, handkerchief, hold it in your hand. I'll pat you down, and you can take care of that, put it where you can get it, and then you get your everything hooked up.
We have what we call a deep-bolt unit here, which holds about 80-some inmates that are on transfer status. They may be inmates that are heading to the north of New York or west, and they stop here overnight, and then we have some that are going from the west down towards the city, and they stop here. It's we're in the center of the state here. So we have approximately about 80 people coming in here on an average day, switching back and forth on buses, mainly because we are central state of New York.
My bus ride was like 8 or 10 hours long, somewhere in there. And you're shackled first thing in the morning, and you ride that bus all day long. You don't have much movement at all, and it's very painful. And especially this new box that they have designed. It's very, very painful if you're in those handcuffs and shackles for several hours.
And when you're sitting there, you're watching the scenery go by, and you look around, you have about 20 guys with you. And it's dreaded because nobody is saying a word. You don't know which institution that you're going to. They keep it to themselves until the final destination.
You know, you're confronted with all the bars. You know your freedom is gone. and you're here for life. You may never get out again. And that reality strikes you, it's like boom, like a bomb going off.
When you walk into that mess hall first thing in the morning, you see all the prisoners, and everybody is looking down. So you have to walk up and, comprehend that you are inside these walls. And it's for real, you're here now.
Isolation, hard work, silence. There are still signposts here from a time when those principles earned Auburn Prison the reputation as a model worthy of the world's attention. All the while, the curative effect of silence on the criminal mind had never been proved. Tourists from across America paid the admission price of 12 cents each to enter and observe the Auburn system of discipline and labor. Most were disturbed by what they saw and wondered how criminals could be reformed in such a place. Foreign nations sent delegates to study the prison. Its most distinguished visitor was Alexis de Tocqueville, the French political scientist, historian, and politician who wrote the landmark book Democracy in America. In 1823, he wrote of Auburn Prison, "Everything passes in the most profound silence, and nothing is heard in the whole prison but the steps of those who march." When the day is finished, the silence within these vast walls, which contain so many prisoners, is that of death. The experience was dehumanizing for Auburn's earliest prisoners. Not only were they kept silent, but they were not allowed to receive visitors, news, or mail. By the turn of the 20th century, the Auburn system of rehabilitation was proving to be a failure.
The Auburn system was probably predicated on a very bad psychology. To think that you would reform somebody by enforcing silence on them for long periods of time just probably wouldn't work. And it didn't work. In fact, it had the opposite effect. A number of inmates went insane.
A surgeon's report from as early as 1822 noted one inmate who leaped off the 4th floor when his cell door was opened, and another who beat and mangled his head and eye against the walls of his cell. In 1890, against the backdrop of silence and insanity, Auburn's grim reputation broadened when the prison installed the world's first electric chair. That same year, the prison became the site of the first legal electrocution. The condemned man was William Kemmler, convicted of killing his lover with a hatchet. At the time, the prison had no electricity. Power for the electric chair was generated by the prison dam in the Owasco River that still flows just outside Auburn's walls.
Electrocution was the latest technology at the time. The execution of Kemmler was in fact botched. It took a couple of jolts before he actually expired. But nonetheless, subsequent executions apparently went more smoothly, and other states then picked up electrocution as the predominant mode of inflicting death.
The most publicized electrocution at Auburn followed one of America's darkest days. September 6, 1901 began as a celebration. Thousands had gathered in Buffalo, New York for an extraordinary event, the Pan American Exposition, a showcase for the art and innovation of turn-of-the-century America. Among those in attendance was the 25th President of the United States, William McKinley. But the day turned tragic as he and his party took their place in a receiving line. Leon Zogaz, a self-described anarchist, approached the president with a revolver concealed in a handkerchief. He reached out as if to shake hands. 1 week later, McKinley died from his wounds. Less than a month after the assassination, Czolgosz became the 15th person to die in Auburn's electric chair. Later that year, Thomas Edison, whose inventions helped make the chair possible, staged and filmed a reenactment of the Czolgosz execution. The macabre scene depicts President McKinley's assassin being led to the death chamber at Auburn. It shows him being restrained with wide leather straps. Electrodes are placed on his ankle and head. After a long pause, the man in the chair begins to rise and fall, just as Czolgosz reportedly did when the switch was thrown and 1,700 volts raced through his body. A moment later, it is over. The burial of Leon Czolgosz provided a bizarre footnote.
It was believed that many people were interested in the remains of Leon Czolgosz, that his remains, after being lowered into the grave, quicklime was poured onto his body, followed by sulfuric acid and water to speed up the process of consuming his body. His gravesite was closed, and an armed guard was left at his gravesite for 3 days, at which time they believed his body would be fully consumed by the lime and the sulfuric acid.
By this time, the Auburn system of imprisonment had also begun to disintegrate. Flogging had been outlawed, followed by the lockstep. Because of crowding, the prison was forced to house 2 men in each cell. Silence was nearly impossible to enforce. The zebra-striped clothing was replaced with military-style uniforms decorated with honor bars. 1 stripe signified a year of perfect conduct, and stripes were added for each additional good year. An inmate who remained out of trouble for 6 years wore a star. Inmates could also earn the privilege of attending elementary school classes and were allowed free time to recreate and associate with fellow convicts. 100 years later, a more violent and dangerous population has taken their place.
Right now you see the recreation yard. It's the main yard in Auburn Correctional. It's open. The inmates are recreating, getting their exercise.
This is the winter. It's supposed to be spring, but it's not in Auburn, New York. And you can see the snow piled up. The inmates come out no matter how bad the weather. They're out here, they recreate. A lot of Spanish inmates like to play dominoes. They'll play it in the snow.
Keeping the peace requires constant vigilance.
Oh, well, inside of Auburn, I've seen a man get killed, up in the gym area, stabbed to death. Everybody was patted down and fresh, security comes in and check things out. Outside in the yard, you'll see guys get into it and, come out with they shanks, we call them. When they dance around for a few minutes, some guys call a bluff. Some of them don't. They wait for the man to get there. So, you're happy to see the security on their job to save the life. And it might be yours that you're standing up there with that shank, hoping that the man get there in time to save you.
You really don't get to keep nothing. This is your bed. Here's your toilet. Small little toilet. All your locker. This way you keep your stuff at. Your clothes, your toilet paper, your utensils.
Dion Sass was sent to Auburn in 1995 for conspiracy to sell narcotics.
Real small cell about, what's this? Touch both sides, so you really like living in a box. To be honest with you. Hopefully I'll get out soon so I don't have to never return here. Come to no place like this again.
Johnny Richardson was convicted of forgery and the sale of a controlled substance.
My job, I'm the block clerk. All right, now my job is to make sure that all the program changes, say like We got some that go from the mess hall to industry. So each time the officers got to know where all of us at. So I type up all the tags. I have my letters from home. I have my cosmetics. I have my legal work. I try to make it look close to the outside as I can, because once I come inside that gate and close it, this is my own world. I got my pictures of my family, my cards, my letters, and my drawing, you know.
I remember my first night here, yeah, it was real loud. Real loud. You know, a lot of noise, people playing music, people playing cards, you know, things like that. People playing chess through the bars, that kind of stuff. You know, I've been down, you know, for 5 years now, so I'm basically used to it, you know.
Life in a cell at New York's Auburn prison hasn't changed much since inmates were granted the right to talk 100 years ago. But some things are different. Perhaps the most important privilege inmates have today is the right to receive mail from the outside. They especially look forward to packages that contain food.
Food is terrible. You know, the people can send you packages with food in it and stuff like that, so basically you can really like eat mostly everything that you really want to eat. But you know, it got to come through the package. You know, they got to check it out to make sure there's no alcohol products and stuff like that.
One of the most labor-intensive jobs at the prison takes place in a windowless room away from the cell blocks.
Food items.
An exhaustive list of contraband items is updated constantly. Weapons can be fashioned out of the most ordinary objects, and drugs can be concealed in the most innocent packaging.
We'll be opening up any kind of closed packaging where you can't see into it. This cannot identify what's in there, so you have to open it up and search in there.
It ranges from canned goods to goodies, you know what I mean? It all has to be sealed stuff, you know what I mean? They have to make sure that, you know, it can't be tampered with.
Even a common soup can became an ingenious device for smuggling drugs.
Took the old label, glued it to this thing here, put it, as you can see in the bottom here, there's a little cushy thing here so it doesn't make too much noise bouncing around in the thing. Put a little bit of water in there and get it the same weight. Just take this thing here and screw it on, nice and tight. And it seals down there again. You can't even tell if it was even open until you find out. You look at it very carefully.
Okay.
How important it is to get packages here. It's a lot to get a package from home, you know, especially the people that you love. Whenever they send you something that's special to you, you know.
Now this item here, we don't disturb the seal on this either. You can see it's still sealed. However, we can't see into it, so we have to take it to the x-ray machine and x-ray it for contraband. You can see we ran a boot through before, and it has a steel shank and the eyelets where the laces go through. Those show up metal. They flash red when it's metal. We'll run that through. As you can see, there's no metal in the cookies. We have metal in the shoes, which are not allowed because the inmates remove them, sharpen them up, and they use them as weapons.
Oh, you're going to have weapons in all penitentiaries. I don't care how hard the security is. When you are inside of a max institution, guys are very, very creative. Very creative. That's automatic. That's just a way of thinking from the streets. And here, I was stabbed myself 5 times, 3 good times and 2 superficial times.
Today, the few comforts inmates have in this maximum security fortress can be traced back to prison reformer Thomas Osborne, who was the mayor of Auburn in 1903. Concerned about reports of inhumane conditions, Osborne received permission from the governor to voluntarily enter Auburn Prison undercover for a week. He was registered as an inmate named Tom Brown.
I believe Osborne, after spending a week in the facility, realized just how bad the conditions were. Using the slop bucket, observing the punishment that was put upon the inmates was just something that he felt was deplorable. The conditions were not what he felt anybody should be subjected to.
For refusing to work under harsh conditions in the basket factory, Osborne was sent to a punishment cell. His memoir, Within Prison Walls, recounted his experience. I enter my iron cage. It is empty of everything except a bucket. There is no seat, no bed, no mattress or bedding, no place to wash, no water to wash with, nothing except the bucket. I presume I should be grateful for that, but I wish it had a cover. No wonder the men down here go insane. No wonder they commit suicide. In 1914, Osborne founded the Mutual Welfare League to support inmate rights and recreation. He later became warden of New York's Sing Sing prison. As a result of Osborne's reform work, inmates could earn the right to leave the prison and work throughout the state in Tom Brown honor camps, so named as a tribute to Osborne's stay in Auburn. In the years that followed, the once solemn prison formed a band and held regular celebrations. Tom Brown Day festivities were marked by field games like sack races. A marching band paraded through the main yard and carried the Mutual Welfare League's simple motto for prison reform: do good, make good.
Buffalo Bill Cody was also brought in as a part of Thomas Osborne's ideas of improving recreation. He brought his Wild West show to Auburn in 1914, which was quite an unusual event to be taking place inside a correctional facility or prison at the time. And it was, I'm sure, quite an event for inmates who weren't accustomed to any type of outside entertainment.
But the relative good life inspired by the Mutual Welfare League would not last long. Within 15 years of Osborne's reform work, Auburn Prison would stand in flames, nearly destroyed in a bloodbath by rampaging prisoners. 180 years have passed since Auburn Prison sat isolated at the edge of a village. Since that time, a free world has grown up just outside its walls and just out of reach of the inmates.
This is the only prison I've been in which was actually outside of a city, and knowing that there's a world right outside the walls is like a tease. It's like it's in your reach, but you can't really grasp it. And it's painful. It hurts.
That means it's a wall around us. You don't see the city. I mean, you know it's there, but you don't see it.
But location aside, this is still a maximum security prison, and Auburn has endured violence, destruction, and bloodshed. By 1929, Auburn was dangerously overcrowded. The inmate count was nearly 1,800 men, but cell capacity provided room for fewer than 1,300.
Auburn experienced two riots, one in July of 1929, the second in December of 29. In the first riot of 29, many of the buildings, workshops, administrative sections of the facility were destroyed and consumed by fire.
The first disturbance was sparked in the arsenal. An inmate tricked the duty guard into letting him in and then sprayed acid in his face. From outside, more inmates rushed in and commandeered weapons and tear gas. Shots were fired. 2 guards were wounded. A third was brutally beaten. In the confusion, 4 inmates escaped over the wall. After a quick, intensive manhunt, they were recaptured. Although prison officials quelled the uprising, a spirit of unrest continued to smolder in the cell blocks.
December 11th, 1929 occurred probably the bloodiest uprising to that point in American penal history.
That morning, because of inmate complaints over bad food and long sentences, Warden Edgar Jennings and 6 guards went out on the main yard to address their concerns.
The warden was taken captive, and the principal keeper at the time was heading to his rescue when he was shot and killed.
The convicts were armed with guns stolen and concealed during the July riot. Fires erupted in the furniture factory and spread to the administration building. Smoke filled the cell houses, forcing more prisoners into the chaos.
The state troopers and many people from the community had converged upon the facility in an effort to take control back from the inmates.
As firefighters dodged bullets, 1,000 New York State militiamen and police entered the walls to free the warden and break the riot. When it was over, 8 convicts were dead.
The prison at the time experienced extensive damage. For about a 12-year period from 1930 to 1942, the place was under considerable construction, in which what you see today, the housing units, the mess halls, the industrial complex, the administrative buildings, were all built during that period.
The prison's auditorium and movie theater was rebuilt and fitted with the same seating that was later installed in New York's Shea Stadium. The immediate post-riot construction included Cell Block A, which remains the largest building at Auburn. It was fitted with a state-of-the-art remote locking system that is still in use today.
All set. Ready.
Lock them in.
Yep. Lock it in.
Inmates and staff in the 4-story cell house follow a regular routine 24 hours a day.
Five o'clock when the count comes, we have to lock in our cell and wait until the count is over with. The count is the officers come by and make sure that we have a live count. Every moving body, head swinging, feet on the floor, lights on. They count the bodies and they make sure that every man is in their cells. And they let us know about 5:30.
On November 4th, 1970, the scene in Cell Block A was very different.
In the riot in '70, this block was taken over by the inmates. The officers tried to close the door. They couldn't get the door closed in time. One officer got hurt pretty bad when he was trying to close the door. The officers downstairs were taken hostage. One officer managed to make it up to the top floor, which we're gradually getting to. And he got himself behind a steel door in hopes to save himself. Luckily for him, the steel door held, and but the inmates worked on it for almost an entire day, hoping to get him out. Luckily, it was strong and it held. They worked on this with bars, different pry devices. They tried to get it open, and it held, and it never did break.
The disturbance raged for 5 hours as inmates negotiated their demands, which included dietary changes and more group therapy. In all, 30 of Auburn's guards were taken captive. One of them was Robert Butura.
I came out of A block and was escorted down here by some inmates to this general area right here. And at that particular time, there were other officers all in a circle, and I sat down in that same circle, and there were inmates surrounding us. And I heard that there was gasoline being spilled.
During the course of the negotiations, the threats were made that the officers were going to be injured or set on fire or whatever. Luckily, the negotiations worked. At the end of the day, one day, the inmates voluntarily locked in.
Auburn Prison had been relatively lucky. 6 guards were injured that day, but no lives were lost. In the aftermath, all inmates were confined to their cells. Officials called it lockdown. But over time, tensions subsided. The inmates emerged, and life inside the walls of Auburn Prison went on. They are something of a cliché. Crooks in the slammer. Convicts who long ago passed into the annals of Auburn Prison's history, along with their memories. Men like Charles Sullivan, a shipping clerk who came here in 1939 convicted of selling heroin because he needed the money. And Joseph Rivers, who said he was drunk when he held up a New York taxi driver for less than $1. Their faces show despair, fear, and the queasy feeling that grips a man who knows he is going away. But these ageless expressions also seem to reflect our own uncertainties about prison. They are doubts that linger in the day-to-day experience of Auburn's modern convicts and the timeless routine they follow.
Someone had told me that I'd be making license plates. In Auburn Prison, maybe 21 years ago, I'd have told them they were crazy. I never thought that this would be my destiny, in prison like this. And I don't think anybody comes to prison really thinks that this is going to be their destiny.
A lot of things flash through your mind. You get to look back at your life like it was in a book. And you read the chapters, and basically you become angry with yourself because you think of all the opportunities you may have had that you just threw away, thinking that negative things couldn't happen. You always knew prison was a possibility, but it always happened to someone else. And after a while, as time goes by and you look back on your life, you realize how stupid you were really thinking.
When you hear the steel door closing on your first day in prison, knowing that you're facing 25 to life, you know that the first thing I thought of was definitely crime does not pay for me.
But sometimes crime does pay. At Auburn, it pays the prison. The 100 inmates who operate the plate shop, for example, generate revenues of $9 million per year. This helps offset the cost of their housing and salaries for their guards. The guards, in turn, efficiently recycle cell space for new convicts.
One pillow.
The last resident of this cell was moved out. For reasons unknown, he was transferred to the prison's mental health unit.
3 white shirts. 3 white shirts.
Sweatpants red. Soda?
Yep. Just give me a soda.
2, 4, 5. That's it.
5. All right.
Prison work is, and has always been, a thankless job. Yet, after 180 years, Auburn's staff is trying to make incarceration seem more human.
Yeah, we found a couple more up here.
I make rounds, and when I do go on a round, I try to go alone. And I go out in the main yard, this yard, or in the main yard where there might be 300-400 inmates, and I do go alone. I go across the yard, and it gives me time and the inmates time to be able to come up to me, talk to me about some of their problems. I think it makes it a more personal thing, and I think it works.
Hello, Spike. Hey. Afternoon, how are you? Good.
As Deputy Superintendent for Security, John Burns is, in effect, Auburn Prison's Chief of Police and its Chief Diplomat.
And the gate. Hi, Mike. Good. The inmates on this company are a little more gentlemanly, a little more docile, a little more cooperative, a little more educated. and they've proven over time that they're halfway decent incarcerated inmates. You want to do mine next? You want to take my pants next? Huh? How you doing, all right? Good, good. My philosophy's always been if you treat them fairly and firmly, you won't have a minimal amount of problems. When I come to work every day, I bring one thing with me, and that's my word, okay? And if I'm open and honest with the inmates, I think that they grow not really to trust me, but they have confidence in me as their deputy superintendent. And they know that if I tell them I'm going to do something, I'll do it, whether it's good or bad. And that doesn't mean I go around threatening the inmates, but it does mean that when I tell an inmate something, he knows that I'm not just making noise to hear myself talk. I mean what I'm saying. This guy won't do my pants next. I asked him nice, too. Oh, yeah? You know? Jesus. Cleans my office, but he won't iron my pants. Huh?
After nearly 2 centuries in operation, Auburn Prisons officials are still struggling to find a balance between punishment and the humane treatment of prisoners. The staff still reports to work each day ready to maintain the prison's long-standing credo, do good, make good. But given the unending supply of inmates, it may prove to be a difficult task.
This is not a positive place. It's not a totally constructive place. You can find constructive things to do, but you're surrounded by negativity. This is hell. Hell cannot be any worse than this, especially when you know that you may have to be here the rest of your life.